Okay, welcome to ICommunicate, and we're gonna take a different approach today than normal because of the time of year we're in. And I'm getting a lot of inquiries from companies right now about things like sales kickoffs, things like strategic planning, facilitating events. But the big one is motivational and keynote speaking opportunities. And the reason I bring this up at the top of the show is because I've always been intrigued by the phrase motivational speaker. It kind of, and I'm one of them, and I'm kind of putting down the phrase, right? Because motivational speaker implies that you're going to listen to someone for 30 minutes or 45 or 60 minutes, and then you're going to be so motivated and enthusiastic that you're going to take that information and you're going to carry it forward with some real momentum. And I don't think that's typically how the human brain works. I think that when you listen to someone that's a rah-rah or a motivational speaker, I see it as a form of entertainment. I see it as a form of entertainment. So if I'm going to sit and watch someone for an hour, it would be akin to, yeah, this is entertaining. I'm engaged. I'm enjoying myself, and I take it for what it's worth. And what's interesting about the phrase motivational speaker, I often, when I'm dealing with clients, I'll often say, I see mindset go as we're more motivational trainers. And the way I see it is that if you're going to bring in a motivational speaker for your company, you're going to do it for one of three reasons. Number one, it's a form of entertainment to reward your employees at some point during the year. Number two, it's a rah-rah event to get people in a positive mindset and frame of mind, either to end a year or to start a new year. And then there's the third one, and this is where the ambiguity lies, and this is why this is going to lead into our show today. And that is that the goal of listening to a motivational speaker is to walk away with tools and tips from that event, which of course is very possible. But if I had a nickel for every time I spoke to someone who listened to a motivational speaker, who took notes, who had concepts resonate with them, and I said, where are those notes today? Oh, they're in a pile on my desk somewhere. Or what are you still using from the motivational speaker you brought in last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago? And sometimes people will have a concept they'll share, and other times they'll say, you know what, I don't really remember. I mean, I enjoyed it. I thought it was engaging. But as far as a takeaway, they don't really have it. And that to me is the norm. And the exception is it's a learning opportunity. And so I say this because Mindset Go is in a transition. We're in a big growth phase right now. And we are hiring other trainers and coaches. And one of my fears and insecurities as we've grown has always been making sure we maintain our standards and our reputations. And so I've been very hesitant to bring on other consultants that do speaking, training, and coaching because they have to meet a certain standard. And this is not a self-indulgent radio show today. We're talking about what are those standards? Because when you talk about the standards, you're talking about how to build and sustain habits in people, how to engage an audience. Companies spend billions of dollars across the world investing in trainers, in coaches to come in and build and sustain habits and behavior change. And you've got two very distinct schools of thought when it comes to professional development. The first school of thought is that we want to reward our employees. We want to use professional development as a retention and a recruiting strategy to grow and develop employees and as a differentiator for our company to know that we really value people. The other school of thought is when you invest in professional development is there's a problem at your company. Maybe the communication isn't where it needs to be. Maybe due to remote and hybrid teams, there's not as much engagement and collaboration. Maybe the leadership isn't as effective as they could be. Maybe the culture isn't where it needs to be. So it's more of a reactive, problem-based. And what I want to focus on today is, as I've been reflecting more and interviewing trainers and coaches, and I have to say, we've been lucky enough to find 3 already that are up to the standard and are driven and are passionate and have an intense core value of learning. And I want to talk about today what that high-level standard is when you're going to invest time and money in your people. And if you're going to hire an outside trainer, if you're going to bring in a speaker, be clear on what the outcomes are. What do you really want to accomplish? So here are my 4 high-level standards that when anybody hires, not just Mindset Go, this is what if I was consulting for a company and helping, if they had a learning and development person, or if they had internal trainers, this is the standard to me. There's 4 pieces to this. And I will say that, in my opinion, every time you do a training session with someone, you should at least hit 2 of these. But the first one's non-negotiable. The first one has to happen every time. And the second, third, and fourth option, hopefully you can do 1 or more of those 3 at minimum. So here are the 4 standards that we have, okay? The first standard is to create an experience. Look, one of the challenges when you get people into training is it's a time commitment. And so many people have so much going on that even if they value training, even if they look forward to learning, they're balancing that with all the obligations and responsibilities they have on their plate. And there's an analogy I make quite often related to trainers and speakers and salespeople. With salespeople, the joke I always make is there have been enough salespeople that have screwed it up for the good salespeople because they're pushy or aggressive. And so that's what's created the stereotype and reputation for salespeople. So I often feel as a salesperson, I have to overcompensate because I know going in that there's a perception of a salesperson. So I feel like I want to overcompensate to make sure I'm not seen as pushy and aggressive. Well, as a trainer or speaker, there's enough trainers and speakers that aren't great, that don't know how to engage an audience, that don't know how to sustain people's attention, that don't know how to make the topic applicable for the audience and relatable, that don't know how to just share knowledge, but take that knowledge and give people the tools to apply that knowledge. Those are all such foundational things. And to me, creating an experience with training has a few pieces involved. Number 1, stimulate thought. People often expect the same old, same old. And again, I use salespeople. Salespeople are the biggest offenders of this in many cases because when salespeople hear they're going to have to go to training, if they have attended training before, they think they already know it all. They think they've already seen it all. And so part of the challenge in stimulating thought is, are you learning something new? Is it a different spin? Do you have a different way to apply the concepts? And I want someone's head to be spinning in a good way after a training session or after a speaking event. I want your thoughts to be swirling around going, geez, I never thought about it that way, or wow, that's a different perspective I hadn't considered. But like excited, like your thoughts are really spinning around, like how can I apply this stuff? What habits do I want to form from this new information that I've just learned? That's one, okay? That's one way to create an experience for people. The second way is to stimulate awareness. One of the things we talk about at Mindset Go about effective communication is word choice. And the 2 words that so many people use that can be very toxic to communication are unfortunately and but. So if you're in a training and you hear a trainer talk about the toxicity of the words unfortunately and but, and knowing how they can such negatively influence communication, if you hear that, are you walking out of the training and go, you know what? I put unfortunately in so many emails. I use the word but when I'm giving feedback to people. Yeah, that's not who I want to be. And so having the awarenesses of certain behaviors you have, that is such a huge takeaway from training. Because when it comes to emotional agility, self-awareness is the first step in habit change. So if you become aware of one of your behavioral tendencies, one of your thought or belief patterns, as a result of speaking and training, that's an enormous win, because that's the first step in change. So that would be a takeaway that you created an experience. And the third piece, and we'll expand more on this after the first break, the third piece is that you have actionable tools and strategies and tips to know how to apply to what you've just learned. So when we come back from our first break, we're going to talk about how to make training the most valuable and worthwhile it can be. And we'll be right back. For Mark Altman, this is ICommunicate. Okay, welcome back to ICommunicate. And we're talking about how to make training stick. You know, I opened the show today by talking about the difference between a motivational speaker and a motivational trainer. And when I say training stick, it's about change management, right? It's about building and sustaining habits. 75% of the curriculum and concepts we teach and that most people teach, you could Google. Like you want to know how to resolve conflicts? Spend an hour online and you get 100 tips in an hour to resolve conflicts. You want to know how to be a better public speaker? There's thousands of things out there to be a better public speaker. You want to know how to manage your emotions more effectively? It's there. The knowledge is there. A powerful speaker or trainer or even coach, the knowledge is one thing, but how do you put the knowledge in a way where people can process it and they know how to apply it, converting knowledge to action? And the ultimate measurement of professional development around speakers, trainers, and coaches is the motivation to learn and apply. Learn and apply, right? So, one of the things when people are designing programs, either internally in companies or externally in companies, one of the big things that's missed is what I call the elephant in the room. And what I really mean is barriers to learning. Okay? First of all, if someone comes in a professional development training situation, okay, the first thing you have to realize is what is their mindset when they come in? Because mindset, everything starts with your ability to manage yourself in your mindset. So once that person walks in the room, here's all the things you're up against, okay? Getting them to be present, right? So the first thing is getting them to be present. They are consumed with work responsibilities, things on their mind, friends, family, personal, professional, meetings they've attended before, things they have to do after. So how do you capture a person's attention the second they walk in the room? So that's the first barrier, right? Getting their attention. The second value is, what are people's expectations? So when you come to a training and you're going to spend 2 hours of your time, what are your expectations? What are your goals? How do you know it will be worth your time? And you want to know something? I don't think most people are clear on their expectations when they come to a training. I think many people are skeptical. I think many people are expecting to be bored based on past experience and precedent. But I think my experience is when I ask people, what are your goals for this training? Or what are your expectations? People struggle to answer. They just know they want it to be good, but they don't know what good means. Like, that's a big piece there. So the elephant in the room, the mindset, what are people's expectations and goals? And they may not know. You may help to help them clarify that. Okay, so that's one thing from a barriers perspective. What are people's expectations and goals? The second is a fixed mindset, a resistance to change. A lot of people don't feel like they need to change. A lot of people don't feel like they want to change. A lot of people feel like they shouldn't have to change. And part of the barriers when you invest time in training and coaching is, what does the narrative look like? I've spoken about this on past shows. If an HR executive or a C-suite leader invites people to training and coaching, the question is, why are you inviting me to this? Why are you involving me in this? Am I broken? Is there something wrong with me? Do I have deficiencies? Or this is a gift? You just want to allow me to strengthen my skills and confidence and mindset? So that narrative can be a barrier. How the professional development is framed in the first place is huge in getting people open-minded and bought in initially, right? Capturing a person's attention, getting people bought in, everything you do in training is based on earning trust, or establishing credibility. These are all things that have to happen in the beginning of a training for anything else to matter. It's a lot, honestly. If you're in the training field or coaching field, capturing a person's attention, getting people bought in and aligned on the importance of what you're doing, earning a person's trust, establishing credibility, that's a long list that a trainer or coach has to embrace those responsibilities. I mean, this is not just trainers and coaches. This is teachers. This is speakers. This is sports coaches. It's all of it. It's parenting, right? So you've got elephant in the room, people's expectations and goals. You've got, what does the narrative look like that is getting your head in the right space attending this opportunity? The third thing I mentioned was a fixed mindset, resistance to change. And the most glaring example I see in a fixed mindset is when someone is learning something new, they immediately go to the situations where the new technique wouldn't work as opposed to where it would work. And that's your brain trying to protect you from having to get out of your comfort zone and experience something new. And this is the biggest one of all. And they're all part of the barriers to change. This is the biggest one of all. And I see this a lot with VP level and senior level executives. Acknowledging and being comfortable with the fact that your current approach may not be the best. If you're in a high leadership position, how did you get there? Well, obviously you had to do several things right. Theoretically, you wouldn't be in a position of leadership if you didn't exemplify or demonstrate some key qualities. We hope, right? That's the idea. But for a leader to admit to themselves, for a leader to admit in front of peers in a group that they work with, that their method may not have been the best method, that's scary. Because what's the takeaway? For a lot of people who struggle with confidence and self-esteem, when you admit something you're doing may not be the best way and approach, that can be hard. It can be a real hit to your confidence and self-esteem, especially if it's something you took a lot of pride in, you've gotten some good feedback about. That's hard. And even if it's not a hit to your confidence and self-esteem, it could be a hit to your pride. Because to have to admit amongst your peers that, yeah, I tend to do that. Yeah, you know what, Mark, now that you mention that, I do tend to do that. That's a big admit there. That's a big acknowledgement. So that's another barrier to learning, is wanting to acknowledge and own the fact that your current method that you've been doing for 5, 10, 20, 30 years may not be the best method. And two of the most common examples of this that I see are two of the most overly used expressions in leadership. One, lead by example, and two, open door policy. And when I'm working with leaders, one of the things I say about lead by example is it's flawed. It's flawed because when you lead by example, it assumes two premises. Number one, that people notice the exact examples you set, and it assumes they only notice your good examples, not your bad ones. With open door policy, the faulty premises with an open door policy is that it assumes just because your door is open, people are going to come in. And it's also a passive form of leadership where you're waiting for people to come in instead of proactively going out and connecting with your team and seeing what's on their minds. So when we're talking about barriers to learning, and I'm going to get into this more in the next segment, but when we're talking about barriers to learning, If I'm teaching you how to be more emotionally agile with managing your emotions, knowing your blind spots, knowing how to influence people's thoughts, feelings, and actions, if I'm teaching you all that stuff, man, I won't even get into the topic until I've removed all your barriers. Because why would I? And this is an aspect of negotiation, which I'm going to get into as we start our third segment. But when we come back, we're going to talk about a few things. First of all, we're going to talk about how to overcome those barriers. Second, we're going to talk about the consequences of not overcoming those barriers. And third, we're going to get into learning mindsets and how to get yourself in the right mindset. So, this is ICommunicate. For Mark Altman, we'll be right back. Okay, we're talking about the difficulty and the importance of engaging an audience and motivating an audience, especially when it comes to professional development and training. And we talked at the top of the show today about the difference between a motivational speaker and a motivational trainer. And the ultimate goal, right, is to get people motivated to apply what they've learned and build and sustain habits. I'm going to keep saying it because that's how I want to be measured, right? You know, it's funny when I talk to clients and they say, you know, what's the ROI going to be for this? You know, we're paying a lot of money. What's the ROI? And I say, well, in my mind, it comes down to a couple of things. First of all, are the people in the training motivated to apply what they learn? And are you seeing habit changes? Are you seeing behavior changes? Are you observing them? Are you hearing them? That's what we're looking for. Training's difficult, right? Because how do you measure the attribution of training? You know, if someone hires us to do a leadership training because the leadership team is struggling to communicate and motivate people, and then I come in for 6 months and do a 12-part program, and then at the end of the program, it's better. Well, how much of that is because of the training, and how much of that is just because of natural growth of the leaders, and vice versa? If they're not as effective, how much of that was because the training isn't good, and how much of it is because the people in the training didn't take the time to practice and apply what they learned? So attribution's really tough. And I boil it down to what I call shifting from a daunting to a doing mindset. Pick some incremental habits that you can grow and apply, because otherwise it gets very difficult. Now, in our last segment, we talked about step one in motivating and engaging an audience and getting buy-in, and that is the elephant in the room, overcoming barriers. And I'm going to share a funny story. Jazz, I don't know if I ever told you this. This is a story about Ted. So this is a true story. So when I first started the show, I think three and a half years ago now, my first 10 shows, and Jazz will probably say that nothing's changed much to today, but the first 10 shows, man, my schedule was crazy. So I would call Ted, Jazz, and I would say, hey, can I pre-record the show at a different time? And Ted and I didn't know each other very well then. And I could tell he was getting so agitated with me, like I was high maintenance. Like I could tell I was really high maintenance. And so part of the barriers and the elephant in the room is addressing the elephant in the room. So I could tell the way Ted was talking to me and dealing with me that I was being high maintenance. So I dealt with it. I came up to him one day and I said, you know, I feel like I'm kind of getting under your skin a little bit. Can we talk about that a little bit? We had a good conversation, and our relationship's been amazing ever since. But that was a barrier, right? Like I knew there was an elephant in the room. I knew I needed to talk to him about it. And that's the thing about learning. You know what? If you don't address people's expectations, if you don't address people's judgments and preconceived notions about training, about what they're going to experience, you lose, right? Because if you can't get that out of the way, and you know what an analogy to this is, if you don't address that up front and build that trust and build that alignment, it's like a salesperson who's dealing with a prospect, and 5 minutes into the sales interaction, the prospect says, so how much is this going to be anyway? And the salesperson says, yeah, we'll get to that. Don't worry, we'll get to that. Well, that's not the answer the prospect wants. They want to know. It's top of mind. They're worried about cost. And as a salesperson, if you don't address that elephant in the room right there and you put it off, every time you explain your product or service And every time you try to talk about features or additional add-ons, in their mind, they're going to be saying, yeah, I wonder how much that will be. And I wonder how that affects the price. So if you don't address the elephant in the room, and by the way, here's another elephant in the room. If you're a salesperson listening to that, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, we can't always give the price up front because we don't know what they want. So how would we even address the price? Well, there's lots of ways to handle that, but just to be simple and concise here, what you say is, look, the pricing can range from X to X, and it depends on a lot of variables. And I promise you by the end of the presentation, we will be able to give you the price. But in the meantime, at least you give them a frame of reference by offering them a range. So the moral to this story is, whether you use an internal resource or you use outside resources to train and coach people, it has to start with removing barriers, understanding what you're up against, understanding the dynamics of your audience, from culture to gender to experience at their job and levels of leadership to generational aspects. There's so many factors to consider when you're getting people in the right frame of mind to be motivated to learn. Those are all important aspects. And if you don't do that, and this is something we take so much pride in at Mindset Go, it's such a big part of our standards. If you don't do that, you're going to lose your audience from the get-go. And you know that expression, you only have one chance to make a first impression? Well, you know what? That's true, maybe. But you know what I'm more interested in? Lasting impressions, right? Because first impressions are really important, and so are lasting ones. But we put way more emphasis typically on first ones than lasting ones. And lasting ones are about building trust.
Well, first impressions is mostly about your appearance and the way you present yourself up front. And then the lasting appearance is more about your actions, your behaviors, the way you treat people.
Yeah, I like that, Jazz. I think to build on to your point, I think a first impression is foundationally what gets you in the door. It's that capturing someone's attention, motivating them, getting them mindful and present. And so 5-10 minutes in, they're like, wow, this is going to be good. This is going to be different. This is going to be better. That's a first impression. The lasting impression is the applicability, the tools, the habits. Like that's the shift from a first to lasting impression. So, when I think of one of the big elephants in the room when it comes to a learning mindset, right? You've got 4 scenarios. When you're building a learning mindset, the learner is going to come from one or more of these 4 spaces. The first one is you're going to have the opportunity to expand your knowledge base and learn something new. Who doesn't want that? Theoretically, that's a great place. If it's something you don't know, wouldn't you be excited to know it? Maybe, if you're not resistant to change. But the first one is expand your knowledge base and learn something new. The second one, and this is big, it reinforces and validates something you're already doing. It provides clarity. And I know for a lot of leadership teams and executives we work with, I hear it often. Someone will come up to me after a training and they'll say, Mark, it's good to hear that I've been doing XX for 5 years now, and I always wondered, is that the best way? And it's great to hear that is a best practice. That is an effective way to do it. The third one is a refresh. Remind you of something you already knew, but you stopped doing, right? For whatever reason, you stopped doing. And the fourth one is improve on something you're already doing. So think about that. 4 things: learn something new, reinforce something good that you're doing, refresh on something that you stopped doing but you knew was good, or fourth is improve on something you're already doing. 4 very distinct places to come from learning, but they're all valuable. And one of the things I notice, and I mentioned this in the last segment about barriers to change, one of the things I notice is we're very big on teaching what we've referred to as conversational intelligence. And conversational intelligence is how you prepare for a conversation and how you execute a conversation. And very often will hear leaders when they hear different strategies or techniques to influence in a conversation. They're like, yeah, no, I already do that. And I think to myself, are you sure? You do it the exact way we just talked about. You make sure your words and tone and body language and listening skills are where they need to be. You're being empathetic. You're being self-aware. You're managing your emotions. There's so many nuances to communication. So when you feel like you've already tried that, whatever that is, what does that even mean? Because if I've had a conversation with somebody and the conversation hasn't yielded the outcome I wanted, why? Why didn't it yield the outcome I wanted? And when you say you've already tried that, well, when you're influencing people, there's 24 strategies you could use to influence people in that conversation. So are you saying you've already had the conversation, or are you saying you've evaluated all the ways you could have approached it differently and you did all of them? That's where I become skeptical. And that's what I mean about a learning mindset. If you learn to protect yourself from being vulnerable and being open to aspects of influence and emotional agility that you may not be utilizing, that's one thing. But it's hard to admit that you may not be doing it the best way. For a lot of people, that's really hard. So the barriers to change are really, really important. The other thing is the learning environment, right? What does the learning environment look like? For us at Mindset Go, our top preference is to have people facing each other. We like to avoid a classroom setup because, let's face it, a lot of people really didn't like classrooms in school. So why would we want to put people in that frame of mind back in a classroom? Not to mention, can we all agree that the typical school classroom is horrible? Like, it's horrible. Why would you want to recreate a classroom? It's not a functional way to learn. Desks weren't comfortable. Chairs weren't comfortable. Who knows what the temperature and climate was like in the classroom? And if you're listening to the show right now, you're probably having horrible memories race through your head when you try to remember what it was like to be in a school classroom. So the learning environment is big. You know, is it conducive to learning? What's the environment? What are the visual aids? And when I say visual aids, let me be clear. I don't mean death by PowerPoint. I mean, how are you stimulating visual learners? How are you getting people to move during the learning experience? It's something I'm continually trying to improve on and focus. Even if it's for 5 or 7 minutes, just get people out of their chairs moving. Because the more you're sitting, I don't care how motivated and engaged you are in a topic, if you're sitting for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours straight, your energy is going to go down because you're not moving. You know, there's no blood flow. You're just sitting there. So the learning environment is big. The movement, the visuals. Are you chunking the learning in a way where people can take small doses at a time? I was talking to my girlfriend last night who's a teacher, and we were talking about a technique that she uses in her 6th grade classroom called turn and talk. And what she does is, after she teaches a new concept to her students, she asks them to turn and talk. And the goal of turn and talk is for them to share what they heard and how they may apply what they just learned. I mean, what a great concept, right? So that's, how do you keep people engaged? How do you sustain that engagement in training? And so that learning environment is huge. It's so big to understand your audience, understand their preferences, understand their learning needs, and understand what's going to motivate them to continue to pay attention and be engaged. So when we come back for our final segment, we're going to talk about habit change. And we're going to end the show today with the complexity that goes along with habit change and why that for all the money and all the time and all the work that goes into speaking and training and coaching, at the end of the day, did anybody change habits? So for ICommunicate, I'm Mark Altman. We'll be right back. Welcome back to ICommunicate for our final segment. Glad you're once again joining us. And we're going to end the show with habit change. And so the premise of the show today is building a learning program, building a training and coaching program. And I don't care if it's a one-off. Like if you're someone listening to the show and you're an individual that's going through a coaching or going through a training, these should be your standards, right? There's both sides to this, right? One is the HR learning development side to know what a successful program looks like. And the other is the participant side to know what to expect and to know how to evaluate for yourself. So it plays out both ways. But I want to end with habit change because it's just so hard. And one of the things, and what I'm going to focus on in this last segment, is progress and standards. And with habit change, what makes it tricky is it starts with expectations. What do you expect of other people when they're going through a habit change? For example, the 3 stages of learning: you learn something new, you unlearn the old, and then you have to relearn new process. Think about that. Learn, unlearn, relearn. So let's pretend, as an example, we're talking about habits. Let's pretend that you tend to get triggered when people frustrate you. How about when people act entitled? You tend to get triggered. And that's been a pet peeve and a trigger for you for the majority of your adult life. So now you want to change that habit. Now you want to learn how to manage your emotions more effectively. So the old way, when you got triggered, was maybe you showed your emotions. Maybe your word choice or tone wasn't the way you'd want it to be. Maybe you showed kind of negative body language. Maybe you stopped listening. You know, whatever your tendencies were when you were dealing with someone who acted entitled, that's a learned behavior that you've maybe done for years and years over the course of your life. Now you attend a training on how to more effectively manage your emotions. So let me just get this straight. You've been struggling to deal with the trigger of people who act entitled, and then you're going to attend a 2-hour training, and just like magic, poof, you're going to be able to put in your new behavior. It doesn't work that way. And you know what I've been experiencing lately is I've been asking the question more and more to leadership in their teams, this one question. I ask them all, when is the last time you changed a habit, you sustained the change, and you had 0 setbacks? And Jazz, I swear to God, I probably asked in the last month 100 people that question. Not one has raised their hand and said, that's me. And that's because habit change is really, really hard.
Well, not having a slip up is the hardest.
Is the hardest, right? Like no setbacks. Like, so if you're in an authority position, if you're in a leadership position, if you're a parent, if you're a coach, what are your expectations? What are your standards? The reason I pose that question to leaders is because I want them to look in the mirror. I want them to look internally, self-reflect, and say realistically, when's the last time you've made an instant change without setbacks? And if you know you haven't, and if you know how hard it is, why would your expectations be different? It's not reasonable. That's not how change takes place. You know, there's a speaker and an author named James Clear, who we model a lot of our habit change curriculum after. And he has a book called Atomic Habits. And the reason why the book is called Atomic Habits, it's not an accident. It's because he put the word atomic because atoms are microscopic, and that's how habit changes take place in incremental small segments. So what are your expectations? Go ahead, Jess.
I just want to say I'm someone who does struggle with people who are entitled. And it has taken me many years, a lot of counseling and therapy to be able to get over that kind of thing, because you have to acknowledge your part in it. You have to acknowledge that you are causing the behavior as well by feeding into it and being triggered by it.
I have nothing to add to that. That was brilliant, and it's true. And so if you're listening to a motivational speaker, okay, and you hear a concept or an idea or a strategy in a motivational speaker, then what? Then what are you going to do with it? You like it? You've got some new knowledge? It reinforced some old knowledge? But what happens next? Who's guiding that change? Who's supporting that change? Who's your accountability partner to allow that habit to take hold and sustain? This is the point I made at the top of the show. Habit change is so hard. You need that reinforcement. You need that coach. You need that leader, support system, parent, whoever to drive that change. So when you look at standards and progress, the reality is it starts with your own expectation of others and what's reasonable and what's incremental. So in the entitled example, Jazz spelled it out brilliantly. Love your vulnerability about the counseling. And I've said this on the show. I see a therapist as well. I'm very proud of it. So, hours of therapy, hours of practice, hours of keeping it on top of mind and being motivated to do it. And it's still a work in progress, right, Jazz?
Oh, every day.
Every day. And that's what emotion management is. It doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean you're never going to be human and have your reactions. It means that you're motivated to apply a new habit and keep it on top of mind. And so when it comes to learning, a lot of people, when they learn new concepts, they try to apply too many things at once. And part of the kryptonite to habit change, beyond standards and expectations, is what's realistic. What's realistic? How many new habits, if 100 people, if 0 out of 100 people have said that they've started and sustained a habit change without setbacks, then what's realistic, not only as far as the steps of sustaining and growing the habit, but how about the initial goal and action plan to build the habit? Like, that's got to be realistic too. A lot of people, when they set goals for themselves related to habits, get so ambitious. And by the way, love ambitious. Love people who are believers in stretch goals and are driven to be the best. But there's a consequence to that I think gets lost a lot. And the consequence is, if your goal is too ambitious and it's not achievable, and then you don't succeed, you feel like a failure. You feel like you weren't good enough because you set the goal too high. For example, I'm going to give you a very simple modeled example. If you're not going to the gym at all and you aspire to go to the gym and you're like, I got to lose weight, I got to get healthy, right? And your ambitious goal is going to the gym 5 days a week and you've been doing it 0. And you're like, no, I got to do this 5 days a week. And let's say for the next 4 weeks, you go 2 or 3 times a week instead of 5. Is your mindset, I failed because I set the goal at 5? Or is your mindset, that's a damn good start because the previous 4 weeks I was going 0 and now I've gone 2 or 3 times? So the way you set a goal for yourself when it comes to a habit or a behavior, it's very important that it's achievable. And if you think you're going to go from 0 visits to the gym every week to 5 on a dime, you're an outlier. Because for every person that goes from 0 to 5 right away, there's 100 that don't start at all, that only go 2 or 3 times. And by the way, I mentioned in the last segment, shifting from a daunting to a doing mindset. Think about something. Think about this behavior and habit. If you have a big project that has 8 parts to it, and you look at that on your to-do list, you're going to want nothing to do with that. It's time consuming. It feels daunting. So you put it out. If you're going to the gym 0 times and now it's 5, now you have to create 5 windows of time in your schedule that you originally had none. So what would feel more manageable and incremental? 2. And guess what? If you go 2 and then you end up going 3, good for you. You've exceeded the expectation and the goal. But when you're building habits, your own standards and expectations of yourself and how you project those standards and expectations on others is central to habit change. Before you even talk about all the factors that go into setting yourself up for success in changing a habit, it starts there. After every training, I will say to the audience, please pick 2 habits that you want to put into practice. What is a goal that you can make around those habits to keep them on top of mind, to even recognize opportunities to put this into practice? And what are a couple of steps of an action plan to make it work? That's it. because I see people furiously taking notes, and you know what makes it really hard? Our three key ingredients to success are emotional intelligence, conversational intelligence, and mindset. And the amount of strategies and tips, there's like hundreds you could put into practice. So for today, final thought for today is this. Whatever you took from the show, shift from daunting to doing. Pick a couple of concepts, figure out a goal that's incremental, figure out a couple of action plan steps, and make it work. Remember, building a training program has a lot of steps to it, but creating that experience where you sustain a learning mindset and sustain habit change, that's what it's about. That's it for ICommunicate. I'm Mark Altman. We'll see you next time.